a blood oath that shattered a dynasty. Aurora de Rossi had always been told that in their world, secrets were weapons. But when she uncovered a truth she was never meant to see, she made the mistake of thinking she could run. Now, Tommaso Benedetti stood in her doorway, his expression unreadable. "You should have known better, Dulcezza," he murmured. "No one runs from me." Chapter 1. The Widow's Unveiling. The scent of lilies, heavy and cloying, still clung to the air, a ghostly reminder of the funeral that had taken place 3 days prior. Aurora de Rossi stood by the window of her late husband's study, the very room where he had drawn his last, labored breath. Below, the manicured gardens of the Villa de Rossi stretched out, bathed in the soft, golden light of the late Tuscan afternoon. But Aurora saw none of it. Her gaze was fixed inward, lost in the labyrinth of her own grief and a burgeoning, terrifying unease. Giancarlo de Rossi had been a powerful man, a capo in the de Rossi family, one of the oldest and most respected and feared families in Florence. His death, officially ruled a heart attack, had sent ripples of shock and uncertainty through their world. A world of whispered conversations, unspoken alliances, and ancient codes of honor. A world Aurora had always inhabited, but never truly understood. She ran a hand over the cool, smooth surface of Giancarlo's massive oak desk. It was pristine, almost unnaturally so. His meticulous nature had always bordered on obsessive, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The usual clutter of papers, the ever-present scent of his favorite Cuban cigars, the subtle indentation in the leather blotter where his heavy signet ring habitually rested, all gone. As if someone had deliberately erased his presence. Aurora, at 58, retained the striking beauty that had first captured Giancarlo's attention decades ago. Her silver-streaked, dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, accentuating the sharp angles of her cheekbones and the intensity of her emerald green eyes. Eyes that now held a flicker of something more than sorrow, a spark of defiance, of suspicion. She had loved Giancarlo, in her own way. Theirs had been an arranged marriage, a union of two powerful families, but a deep affection, a comfortable companionship, had grown over the years. He had been her protector, her guide in this treacherous world. Now, she was alone, adrift in a sea of veiled threats and unspoken expectations. A soft knock on the door startled her. "Signora?" It was Maria, the housekeeper, her voice hushed with respect and a hint of pity. Maria had been with the family for longer than Aurora, a silent observer of their lives, a keeper of their secrets.
"Come in, Maria."
The older woman entered, her wrinkled face etched with concern. "Signora, the men are waiting." The men. The famiglia. Aurora knew what they wanted. To offer their condolences, of course, but also to assess, to probe, to determine her position in the new power structure that was inevitably forming. Giancarlo's death had left a void, and nature, especially human nature, abhorred a vacuum. "Tell them I will be down shortly," Aurora said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. Maria hesitated. "Signora, forgive me, but Signor Benedetti is here." Tommaso Benedetti. The name sent a shiver down Aurora's spine. Giancarlo's second in command, his most trusted lieutenant, and the man who now, by tradition and by sheer force of personality, held the reins of the de Rossi family. A man who, even in her grief-stricken state, Aurora could not help but feel a complex mixture of fear and something else. Something she dared not name. Tommaso was a decade younger than Aurora, but he carried himself with the authority of a man twice his age. He was undeniably handsome, in a dark, dangerous way. His hair was black as a raven's wing, his eyes the color of deep, stormy seas, and his features were sharp and sculpted, hinting at a lineage that stretched back centuries, to the very heart of the Florentine aristocracy. But it was the aura of controlled power that surrounded him, the sense of something wild and untamed barely held in check, that both intimidated and intrigued her. "Tell Signor Benedetti I will be down presently," Aurora repeated, her voice firmer this time. She needed a moment, a few precious seconds to compose herself, to steel her nerves before facing the man who held her fate and the fate of the family in his hands. As Maria retreated, Aurora turned back to the window. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the gardens. She saw movement, a flicker of darkness, near the ancient olive grove. A figure, tall and imposing, emerged from the shadows. Tommaso. He was watching the villa, his posture radiating an almost palpable tension. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to quell the sudden, irrational flutter in her chest. She had always known that life in the Famiglia was a precarious dance on the edge of a knife. But she had never imagined she would be dancing alone, with the music threatening to stop at any moment. And with Tommaso Benedetti, the conductor, a man with dangerous secrets of his own. The secret, the one she was not meant to find, but found anyway, was hidden in a false bottom in one of his desk's drawers. A letter. A letter that proved her husband did not die from a heart attack. And the signature at the end made her blood run cold. She straightened her shoulders, smoothing down the black silk dress she wore. It was time to face the music, to confront the shadows, and to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. She had a feeling the price would be steep. Very steep. And she was about to pay the first installment. Because Tommaso was not known for patience. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. The drawing room was bathed in the warm glow of antique chandeliers, the light reflecting off the polished marble floors and the richly embroidered tapestries that adorned the walls. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood, expensive brandy, and the underlying tension that always permeated gatherings of the Famiglia. Aurora descended the grand staircase, her hand gliding along the smooth, cool mahogany banister. She could feel their eyes on her, assessing, calculating. The men of the Dynasty family, and a few of their trusted advisors, were gathered in small clusters, their hushed conversations ceasing as she entered the room. There was old Marco, Giancarlo's uncle, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and regrets, leaning heavily on his carved ebony cane. Beside him stood Alessandro, Giancarlo's younger, more impetuous brother, his eyes filled with a volatile mixture of grief and ambition. And then there was Tommaso. He stood apart from the others, near the large fireplace, his back to the room. He was dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit that accentuated his broad shoulders and lean physique. He held a glass of amber liquid in his hand, swirling it slowly, seemingly lost in thought. But Aurora knew better. He was aware of her presence, of every rustle of her dress, every beat of her heart. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, he turned, his eyes meeting hers across the room. The impact was like a physical blow. Those dark, intense eyes seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed facade, to the fear and uncertainty that lay beneath. "Aurora," he said, his voice a low, resonant murmur that sent a shiver down her spine. "You look as well as can be expected." The words were conventional, but the tone was not. There was a subtle undercurrent, a hint of something more than mere politeness. A challenge? A warning? Or something else entirely? She inclined her head slightly. "Tommaso, thank you for coming." He moved towards her, his movements fluid and graceful, like a panther stalking its prey. He stopped a few feet away, close enough for her to catch the faint scent of his cologne, a subtle blend of sandalwood and something darker, more primal. Giancarlo was a good man, Tommaso said, his gaze unwavering. A strong leader. He will be missed. Yes, Aurora agreed, her voice tight.
He will.
An awkward silence fell between them, filled only with the crackling of the fire and the unspoken questions that hung heavy in the air. "The Famiglia needs direction, Aurora," Tommaso said finally, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Stability. Someone to guide us through this difficult time." She knew what he was implying. He was the obvious choice. The rightful heir, in a way. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher, that made her hesitate. "I understand," she said carefully. "And I am sure you will fulfill that role admirably." A faint smile played on his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You have always been perceptive, Aurora. Too perceptive, perhaps, for your own good." The words were a veiled threat, a reminder of the secrets she held, the knowledge that could shatter the fragile peace that held their world together. The letter. The proof of Giancarlo's murder. I only want what is best for the family, Tommaso, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. As Giancarlo always did. He took a step closer, his proximity almost overwhelming. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, the intensity of his gaze. "And what is best for you, Aurora?" he asked, his voice a low, husky murmur that sent a wave of heat through her. "What do you want?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. It was a dangerous question, a loaded question, and she knew she had to tread carefully. "I want justice," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "For Giancarlo. For the family. For myself." His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he were trying to decipher the hidden meaning behind her words. He knew. He had to know. The signature on that letter was his cousin's, a known enforcer. A man Tommaso controlled. "Justice can be a complicated thing, Dolcezza," he said softly, using the endearment that sent a shiver of both fear and a strange, unwanted thrill through her. "Especially in our world. Sometimes the truth is best left buried. And sometimes," Aurora countered, her voice gaining strength, "the truth demands to be brought to light, no matter the cost." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then a slow, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips. A smile that held a hint of both admiration and danger. "You are a brave woman, Aurora Derossi," he said, his voice a low, seductive whisper. "Braver than you know. But bravery can be a dangerous thing, especially when it is directed at the wrong person." He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against her cheek. The touch was fleeting, barely there, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her. "Be careful, Dolcezza," he murmured, his eyes locking with hers. "Very careful. The shadows of the past can be long and unforgiving." He turned and walked back towards the fireplace, leaving Aurora standing alone, her heart pounding, her mind racing. The game had begun, and she knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was playing for her life. The unspoken tension, the veiled threats, the subtle dance of power and desire, it was all a prelude to something far more dangerous. Something that was lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to explode. And she had a feeling it was going to be sooner, rather than later. Chapter 3. A bargain struck in darkness. The days following the funeral were a blur of hushed conversations, veiled threats, and strategic maneuvers. Aurora found herself navigating a treacherous landscape of shifting alliances and hidden agendas. The famiglia was restless, uncertain of its future, and every conversation felt like a negotiation, every interaction a potential trap. Tommaso was a constant presence, his shadow looming over her, a mixture of protector and predator. He was attentive, solicitous, almost possessive. He would appear at her side unexpectedly, offering a comforting word, a reassuring touch, a subtle reminder of his power and control. One evening, he found her in the library, a vast, cavernous room filled with ancient tomes and the lingering scent of old paper and leather. She was sitting by the window, gazing out at the darkening gardens, lost in thought. "You seem troubled, Aurora," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. She turned, startled. He had moved with such quiet grace that she hadn't even heard him enter. He was standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway, his features obscured by shadow. "I am," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Everything, it's overwhelming." He moved into the room, his footsteps silent on the thick Persian rug. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes searching hers. "Giancarlo's death, it has left a void," he said. "A void that must be filled." "And you believe you are the one to fill it," Aurora said, her voice tinged with a hint of challenge. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent a shiver down her spine. "I am the most qualified," he said. "The most capable. The most willing." "And what about the letter?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, the question hanging heavy in the air between them. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold calculation. "The letter?" he repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. "What letter?" She knew he was lying. He knew she knew. It was a dangerous game they were playing, a dance of deception and unspoken truths. "The letter that proves Giancarlo was murdered," Aurora said, her voice trembling slightly, but her gaze unwavering. He took a step closer, his proximity almost overwhelming. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, the intensity of his gaze. "You have proof?" he asked, his voice a low, husky murmur. "I have suspicions," she corrected, choosing her words carefully. "Strong suspicions." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against her cheek. The touch, though fleeting, sent a jolt of electricity through her. "Suspicions can be dangerous, Dulcezza," he said softly. "Especially when they are unfounded." "And what if they are founded?" Aurora countered, her voice gaining strength. "What then?" He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. She could feel his breath on her skin, the faint scent of his cologne, a heady mixture of sandalwood and danger. "Then we will deal with them," he said, his voice a low, seductive whisper. "Together." The word "together" hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. It was a promise, a threat, and an invitation all rolled into one. "What do you propose, Tommaso?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, but her gaze unwavering. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach his eyes.
"A bargain," he said.
"A partnership. You have something I want and I have something you need." "And what is it that you want?" Aurora asked, her heart pounding in her chest. "The letter," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And your silence." "And in return?" "My protection," he said. "My support." "My loyalty." It was a Faustian bargain, a deal struck in darkness. She knew she was playing with fire, that she was walking a tightrope between survival and destruction. But she also knew that she had no choice. She was alone, vulnerable, and Tommaso Benedetti was the only one who could offer her a semblance of safety in this treacherous world. "And what about justice for Giancarlo?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He hesitated, his gaze flickering for a moment. "Justice will be served," he said finally, his voice lacking conviction. "In time." She knew he was lying, that he was protecting his own interests, his own family. But she also knew that she had to trust him, at least for now. She had to play the game, to bide her time, to uncover the truth, piece by piece. "Very well, Tommaso," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "I accept your bargain." He smiled, a genuine smile this time, one that reached his eyes and transformed his features, making him appear almost vulnerable. "I knew you would see reason, Dulcezza," he said, his voice a low, husky murmur. "You are a smart woman, Aurora Derasi. A survivor." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers closing around hers. The touch was warm, strong, and strangely comforting. "We will make a formidable team. You and I," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "We will conquer the shadows together." And as she looked into those dark, intense eyes, she knew that she had just made a deal with the devil. A deal that could either save her or destroy her completely. The bargain was struck, the lines were drawn, and the game had officially begun. The darkness had enveloped them both, and she could only hope that she would emerge from it unscathed. The night held its breath, and so did she, uncertain of what the dawn would bring. The only certainty was Tommaso and the dark promise he had made. Chapter 4. The Whispers of Florence. Florence, a city of art, history, and hidden secrets, pulsed around Aurora like a living, breathing entity. The ancient cobblestone streets, the magnificent Renaissance palaces, the vibrant markets filled with the chatter of locals and the aroma of freshly baked bread, it all seemed to mock her inner turmoil, her precarious position in a world on the brink of upheaval. Tommaso had instructed her to act as if nothing had changed, to maintain the facade of the grieving widow, while he subtly consolidated his power within the famiglia. It was a delicate dance, a performance that required every ounce of her strength and cunning. She spent her days attending to the mundane tasks of running the villa, overseeing the staff, and dealing with the endless stream of visitors who came to offer their condolences. But her mind was constantly racing, replaying her conversations with Tommaso, analyzing his every word, his every gesture, searching for clues, for any hint of his true intentions. One afternoon, she decided to visit the Mercato Central, the bustling central market, hoping to lose herself in the vibrant chaos of everyday life. She wandered through the stalls, inhaling the intoxicating aroma of ripe tomatoes, fragrant basil, and aged cheeses. She exchanged polite greetings with the vendors, many of whom had known her for years, their faces etched with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. As she was examining a display of colorful Florentine ceramics, she heard a voice behind her.
Signora De Rossi.
She turned to see a woman, perhaps a few years older than herself, with kind eyes and a warm smile. It was Sofia, the owner of a small trattoria near the Ponte Vecchio, a place where Aurora and Giancarlo had often dined. Sofia, Aurora said, returning the smile. It's good to see you. I am so sorry for your loss, Signora, Sofia said, her voice filled with genuine sympathy. Giancarlo is a good man. Thank you, Sofia, Aurora said, her voice tight.
He was.
Sofia hesitated, her gaze flickering around the crowded market. Signora, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. There are whispers. Aurora's heart skipped a beat. Whispers? She repeated, her voice barely audible. About Giancarlo's death, Sofia said, her eyes filled with concern. People are saying it was not natural. Aurora felt a chill run down her spine. The rumors had spread, faster than she had anticipated.
What are they saying?
She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. They are saying he was betrayed, Sofia said, her gaze locking with Aurora's. By someone close to him. Aurora knew she had to be careful, that any hint of suspicion could be dangerous. People talk, Sofia, she said, forcing a dismissive tone. It's natural, after such a sudden loss. Sofia studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Perhaps, she said finally, but I know you, Signora. You are not one to ignore the truth. She reached out and gently touched Aurora's arm. Be careful, Signora, she said, her voice filled with a warning. The walls have ears, and some secrets are best left undisturbed. Sofia melted back into the crowd, leaving Aurora standing alone, her heart pounding, her mind racing. The whispers of Florence were growing louder, more insistent, and she knew that she couldn't ignore them any longer. She returned to the villa, her senses on high alert. She noticed the subtle glances, the hushed conversations that ceased abruptly as she approached. The servants, the guards, even Maria, the loyal housekeeper, they all seemed to be watching her, waiting for something. That evening, Tommaso arrived unexpectedly. He found her in the garden, sitting on a stone bench near the ancient olive grove, the same place where she had seen him on the day of the funeral. You seem troubled, Dolcezza, he said, his voice a low murmur in the twilight. She turned to him, her eyes searching his. The whispers, Tommaso, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They are growing louder. He sat down beside her, his proximity both comforting and unsettling. Whispers are like the wind, Aurora, he said. They come and go. They mean nothing. But these whispers, they speak of betrayal, Aurora said, her voice trembling slightly. Of murder. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant lights of the city. And what do you believe, Aurora? He asked finally, his voice devoid of emotion. She hesitated, her mind racing. She knew she had to be careful, that she couldn't reveal too much, not yet. I believe there is more to Giancarlo's death than we have been told, she said carefully. He turned to her, his eyes locking with hers. The intensity of his gaze was almost unbearable. And what will you do about it? He asked, his voice a low, husky murmur. I will find the truth, Aurora said, her voice gaining strength. No matter the cost. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach his eyes. I admire your determination, Dolcezza, he said. But be warned, the truth can be a dangerous thing, especially in our world. The air thickened, a tangible web of unease between them. The city whispered around them, and Aurora couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, judged, and ultimately tested. The whispers were the city, and she had to be ready to hear what they were truly saying. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Lost Love. The past, Aurora discovered, was not a silent, dormant thing. It echoed in the present, shaping events, influencing relationships, and revealing hidden truths. And for Aurora, the past held a secret, a lost love that had been buried deep within her heart, a memory that now resurfaced, complicating her already treacherous present. Before Giancarlo, before the arranged marriage that had bound her to the Dynasty family, there had been Lorenzo, a young artist, full of passion and dreams, a man who had seen her, truly seen her, not just the daughter of a powerful family. Their love had been a whirlwind, a brief, intense flame that had burned brightly before being extinguished by the cold, harsh realities of their world. She had never forgotten him. His memory had been a refuge, a secret garden she had visited in her heart during the long, lonely years of her marriage. She had believed him dead, lost at sea, another casualty of the family's ruthless ambition. But a chance encounter, a fleeting glimpse of a familiar face in a crowded piazza, had shattered that belief. Lorenzo was alive. And he was in Florence. The shock of seeing him again had been overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotions that had threatened to drown her. He had changed, of course. The youthful exuberance had been replaced by a weariness, a sadness that mirrored her own. But his eyes, those deep, soulful eyes, were the same. They still held the same spark of passion, the same hint of defiance that had first captivated her. She had followed him, discreetly, her heart pounding in her chest. He had led her to a small, unassuming art studio in the Altrarno district, a place filled with the scent of oil paint and turpentine, a place that felt like a sanctuary, a world away from the darkness of the Famiglia. She had watched him from afar, her mind racing, her heart aching with a mixture of longing and regret. She had wanted to approach him, to speak to him, to explain, to apologize. But she had hesitated, fearing the consequences, fearing the pain of reopening old wounds. One evening, she found the courage to confront her past. She stood outside his studio, her hand trembling as she raised it to knock on the weathered wooden door. He opened the door, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw her. "Aurora?" he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and something else, something she couldn't quite decipher. "Lorenzo," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I saw you." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "It's been a long time," he said finally, his voice devoid of emotion. "Yes," she agreed, her voice tight. "A very long time." An awkward silence fell between them, filled only with the sounds of the city and the unspoken memories that hung heavy in the air. "I thought you were dead," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. He smiled, a sad, wistful smile.
"I was in a way," he said.
"But I survived. I found my way back. Why didn't you contact me?" she asked, her voice filled with a mixture of pain and accusation. He hesitated, his gaze flickering away from hers. "It was complicated," he said. "Your family, they would not have approved." "I know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. But it doesn't matter now, Aurora," he said, his voice firm. "You are married. You have a life, a different life." "Yes," she agreed, her voice filled with regret. "A different life." She told him about Giancarlo's death. He listened in silence. "I am sorry," he finally responded. "There are things you don't know," she whispered.
"Tell me,"
he said softly, taking her hand. The warmth of his touch, the familiarity of it, made her want to tell him everything. But Tommaso's words echoed in her mind, a warning, a threat. She couldn't trust anyone, not even Lorenzo, not yet. I can't," she said, pulling her hand away. "Not now." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Be careful, Aurora," he said, his voice a low murmur. The past can be a dangerous place, especially when it is intertwined with the present. He turned and walked back inside, the click of the lock echoing in the cold Florence night. And Aurora knew, with a chilling certainty, that her past and her present were about to collide, with potentially devastating consequences. Her lost love was a ghost no more, and his presence threatened to unravel everything she had carefully constructed. Chapter 6. The Lion's Den. Tommaso summoned her. Not to the villa, not to any of the usual meeting places, but to the Leone d'Oro, the Golden Lion, a private club that served as the unofficial headquarters of the Dynasty family. It was a place of power, of secrets, of unspoken deals, and deadly rivalries. A place where Aurora had rarely ventured, a place that represented the very heart of the world she was trying to navigate and perhaps escape. The club was located in a discreet, unassuming building in a quiet side street near the Piazza della Signoria. The exterior was plain, almost unremarkable, but the interior was a different story. It was opulent, luxurious, a testament to the wealth and power of the Dynasty family. The walls were paneled in dark, richly carved wood, the floors were covered in thick Persian rugs, and the air was heavy with the scent of expensive cigars, aged brandy, and the underlying tension that always permeated gatherings of the famiglia. Aurora arrived, escorted by two of Tommaso's men, their presence a constant reminder of her precarious position. She was dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, her only jewelry a single strand of pearls, a gift from Giancarlo. She felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach as she entered the club, her senses on high alert. The main room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a few strategically placed lamps and the flickering flames of a large fireplace. Several men were gathered in small groups, their hushed conversations ceasing abruptly as she entered. She recognized some of them, the familiar faces of the Dynasty famiglia, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Tommaso was standing near the fireplace, his back to the room, engaged in a conversation with Alessandro, Giancarlo's younger brother. He turned as she approached, his eyes meeting hers across the room. The impact was like a physical blow. Those dark, intense eyes seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed facade, to the fear and uncertainty that lay beneath. "Aurora," he said, his voice a low, resonant murmur that sent a shiver down her spine. "You came. You summoned me," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed," he said. "We have much to discuss." He dismissed Alessandro with a curt nod, and then turned his full attention to Aurora. He gestured towards a small, private alcove, separated from the main room by a heavy velvet curtain. "Shall we?" he said, his voice a low, seductive whisper. She followed him into the alcove, her heart pounding in her chest. The space was small, intimate, furnished with two leather armchairs and a small table. The air was thick with the scent of Tommaso's cologne, a heady mixture of sandalwood and danger. He closed the curtain behind them, shutting out the noise and the prying eyes of the other men. They were alone, enclosed in a world of shadows and unspoken secrets. "You look tense," Tommaso said, his eyes searching hers. "This place, it's not exactly my usual environment," Aurora replied, trying to keep her voice light. He smiled, a genuine smile this time, one that reached his eyes and transformed his features, making him appear almost vulnerable. "I understand," he said. "But you are a Dynasty, Aurora. Whether you like it or not. This is your world, too." "I'm not so sure about that," Aurora said, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a step closer, his proximity almost overwhelming. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, the intensity of his gaze. "You are stronger than you think, Dulcezza," he said softly. "More resilient, more adaptable. And what if I don't want to adapt?" Aurora countered, her voice gaining strength. "What if I want to escape?" His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he were trying to decipher the hidden meaning behind her words. "Escape is an illusion, Aurora," he said, his voice a low, husky murmur. "There is no escape from the famiglia, from our obligations. From our destiny. He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against her cheek. The touch was fleeting, barely there, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her. But perhaps, he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, we can find a way to redefine our destiny. Together. The word together hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. It was a promise, a threat, and an invitation all rolled into one. I saw Lorenzo. She blurted out, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Tommaso's hand froze on her cheek. His eyes darkened, a flicker of something dangerous crossing his features. Lorenzo? He repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. He's alive, Aurora said, her voice trembling slightly. I saw him. The air grew heavy, the club's muted opulence suddenly feeling like a cage. She had entered the lion's den, and now, she had inadvertently revealed a secret she had meant to keep hidden, a secret that could change everything. Tommaso's reaction was unreadable, a mask of control hiding the storm that surely raged beneath. Chapter 7. Sins of the Father. The revelation hung in the air, thick and heavy, like the smoke from Tommaso's unlit cigar. He slowly withdrew his hand from her cheek, the warmth replaced by a chilling emptiness. He turned away, walking towards the small table where a decanter of brandy and 2 glasses sat. He poured himself a generous amount, the amber liquid sloshing against the crystal. Lorenzo, he repeated, his voice low and controlled, but with an undercurrent of something Aurora couldn't quite place. Anger? Jealousy? Or something far more dangerous? I had heard rumors. Foolish whispers. I dismissed them. He took a long swallow of the brandy, his eyes fixed on the swirling liquid in his glass. He was supposed to be dead, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Lost at sea. That's what everyone believed. He survived, Aurora said, her voice trembling slightly.
He's back.
Tommaso turned to her, his eyes dark and intense. And what did you say to him? He asked, his voice sharp, probing. I didn't say much, Aurora said, choosing her words carefully. I told him about Giancarlo. That he was dead.
And?
Tommaso pressed, his gaze unwavering. And nothing, Aurora said, her voice barely above a whisper. I told him I couldn't talk. Not yet. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He was trying to gauge her truthfulness, to see if she was hiding something. And she was. She was hiding the depth of her feelings for Lorenzo, the rekindled hope, the lingering regret. You know this changes things, Aurora, he said finally, his voice devoid of emotion.
How?
She asked, her heart pounding in her chest. He took a step closer, his proximity almost overwhelming. Lorenzo was a complication, he said. A loose end. A threat to the family. He's an artist, Tommaso, Aurora said, her voice rising slightly. He's no threat to anyone. He was your lover, Tommaso said, his voice a low, possessive growl. Before Giancarlo. Before the Famiglia. He knows things.
He knows you.
The words were a veiled accusation, a reminder of her past, of the choices she had made, of the life she had left behind. That was a long time ago, Aurora said, her voice trembling slightly. It doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me, Tommaso said, his eyes locking with hers. Everything about you matters to me. The intensity of his gaze was almost unbearable. She felt a strange mixture of fear and something else. Something she dared not name. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the curve of her cheekbones. You belong to the Famiglia now, Aurora, he said, his voice a low, husky murmur.
To me.
The words were a claim, a possession, a warning. She was his, in a way, bound to him by duty, by obligation, by the secrets they shared. I belong to no one, Tommaso, Aurora said, her voice gaining strength, defying the subtle pressure of his hands. I am my own person. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach his eyes.
Perhaps, he said.
But you're also a Derossi. And the Derossi family protects its own. We take care of our problems. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. He was talking about Lorenzo. He was threatening him. "Don't hurt him," Tommaso, Aurora said, her voice pleading.
Please.
He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he leaned closer, his lips brushing against her ear. "I will do what is necessary, Dulcezza," he whispered.
For the family. For you.
"For us." He released her, stepping back, the distance between them feeling vast and unbridgeable. He had made his position clear. Lorenzo was a threat, and he would deal with him, one way or another. The conversation shifted, abruptly, to the business of the famiglia. Tommaso spoke of a rival family, the Morettis, who were making moves on their territory, encroaching on their businesses. He spoke of the need for strength, for unity, for decisive action. As he spoke, Aurora realized that Lorenzo's reappearance had not only complicated her personal life, but it had also thrown a wrench into Tommaso's plans. It had made him vulnerable, uncertain, and that made him even more dangerous. He revealed a piece of his past, a story about his father. How he had to kill his own father, to take his spot. How his father was weak and had dealings with the Morettis. "I will not be weak, like him," Tommaso had declared. The meeting ended, leaving Aurora shaken and deeply uneasy. She had entered the lion's den, and she had emerged with a clearer understanding of the stakes, of the dangers that surrounded her. She had also seen a glimpse of the darkness that lay beneath Tommaso's carefully constructed facade, the ruthlessness that he was capable of. The sins of the father were casting a long shadow, and she feared that she and Lorenzo were about to be caught in its darkness. The weight of the family, its history, and its future pressed down on her, a suffocating burden. Chapter 8. A Dance of Deception. Life, Aurora realized, had become a performance, a carefully choreographed dance of deception. She moved through her days with a forced smile, a facade of normalcy, while her mind raced, plotting, planning, trying to find a way to protect herself and Lorenzo from the gathering storm. Tommaso was ever present, his watchful gaze following her, a constant reminder of his power and control. He was attentive, solicitous, almost loving. He would bring her small gifts, flowers from the villa gardens, a rare book he knew she would appreciate, a piece of jewelry that had belonged to his mother. He would engage her in conversations, discussing art, literature, history, anything to distract her from the darkness that surrounded them. But she knew it was an act, a carefully crafted illusion designed to keep her close, to keep her under his control. She saw the subtle glances, the coded messages exchanged between him and his men, the veiled threats directed at anyone who dared to question his authority. She tried to maintain contact with Lorenzo, discreetly, cautiously. They would meet in hidden corners of the city, in quiet cafes, in dimly lit churches, their conversations brief, guarded, filled with unspoken longing and fear. "I'm worried, Aurora," Lorenzo said during one of their clandestine meetings, his voice filled with concern. "This is dangerous. For both of us." "I know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I can't just abandon you. You have to think of yourself," he said, his eyes searching hers. "This world, it's not for you. It's my world, too, Lorenzo," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Whether I like it or not. There's still time to leave," he pleaded.
To escape.
"We could go away together, start a new life, somewhere far from here." The temptation was almost overwhelming. To run away, to leave behind the darkness, the secrets, the constant fear. To be with Lorenzo, to recapture the love they had lost. But she knew it was a fantasy, an impossible dream. She was bound to the famiglia, to Tommaso, by duty, by obligation, by the knowledge she possessed. "I can't," she said, her voice filled with regret.
Not yet.
She was playing a dangerous game, balancing her loyalty to Lorenzo with her precarious alliance with Tommaso. She was walking a tightrope. One wrong step could send her tumbling into the abyss. She began to investigate, discreetly, cautiously, trying to uncover the truth about Giancarlo's death, about Tommaso's involvement, about the Moretti family's growing threat. She used her position as Giancarlo's widow to her advantage, accessing his old files, questioning his former associates, piecing together the fragments of information like a complex, deadly puzzle. She discovered a hidden ledger, concealed in a secret compartment in Giancarlo's study, a detailed record of his financial transactions, his dealings with other families, his secrets. The ledger revealed a pattern of corruption, of betrayal, of violence that stretched back years, implicating not only Tommaso, but also several other prominent members of the famiglia. The information was dangerous, explosive, and she knew she had to be careful with it. One wrong move, one misplaced word, could expose her, could put her life, and Lorenzo's, in even greater danger. She decided to confide in Maria, the loyal housekeeper, the woman who had been with the family for longer than Aurora. She trusted Maria, implicitly, and she knew that she needed an ally, someone on the inside, someone who could help her navigate the treacherous currents of the famiglia. "Maria," she said one evening, as they were alone in the kitchen, "I need your help." Maria looked at her, her eyes filled with concern. "Signora," she said, her voice hushed, "what is it?" Aurora hesitated, her mind racing. She knew she was taking a risk, a huge risk, but she had no choice. "I know things, Maria," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dangerous things. About Giancarlo's death. About Tommaso. About the famiglia." Maria's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. She simply waited, patiently, for Aurora to continue. Aurora told her everything about the letter, about Lorenzo, about the ledger, about her suspicions, her fears, her hopes. Maria listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When Aurora was finished, she simply nodded. "I have served this family for many years, Signora," Maria said finally, her voice firm. "I have seen many things, heard many things. I know the secrets, the darkness. Will you help me?" Aurora asked, her voice pleading. Maria reached out and took Aurora's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "I will, Signora," she said. "I will help you. For Giancarlo. For you. For the truth." And in that moment, Aurora felt a glimmer of hope, a flicker of light in the encroaching darkness. She had an ally, a confidant, someone she could trust. The dance of deception continued, but now she had a partner, someone to help her navigate the treacherous steps, someone to watch her back. The stakes were higher than ever, but she was no longer alone. The music swelled, a dangerous, seductive melody, and Aurora prepared to dance, to fight, to survive. Chapter 9. The Unseen Threat. The Morettas. Their name was spoken in hushed whispers, a constant undercurrent of threat that permeated the de Rossi family's world. They were rivals, enemies, a force to be reckoned with. And their growing ambition, their encroachment on de Rossi territory, was becoming a major concern. Tommaso had been preoccupied with the Moretti threat, his days and nights consumed by meetings, negotiations, and strategic planning. He was on edge, volatile, his usual controlled demeanor replaced by a simmering anger, a barely contained violence. Aurora, despite her own precarious situation, found herself drawn into the conflict. She knew that the Morettas were somehow connected to Giancarlo's death, that they were a key piece of the puzzle she was trying to solve. She continued her investigation, discreetly, cautiously, using her position as Giancarlo's widow to gather information, to probe, to uncover the truth. She learned that the Morettas were not just a rival family, but a deeply entrenched enemy, with a long history of conflict with the de Rossis. She discovered that Giancarlo had been involved in a secret deal with the Morettas, a deal that had gone sour, a deal that had ultimately led to his death. The deal involved a shipment of illicit goods, a lucrative but dangerous venture that had been orchestrated by Tommaso's cousin, the same man who had signed the letter Aurora had found. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the picture that was emerging was far more complex and far more dangerous than she had imagined. One evening, Tommaso summoned her to his study, a private, almost sacred space within the villa, a place where he conducted his most sensitive business. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a single desk lamp and the flickering flames of a fireplace. The air was thick with the scent of old leather, expensive cigars, and the underlying tension that always surrounded Tommaso. "Aurora," he said, his voice low and controlled, but with an undercurrent of something she couldn't quite place. "We have a problem." She knew what he was going to say. The Morettas. "They're making moves," he said, his eyes dark and intense. "They're testing us. They're pushing us." "What do you want me to do?" Aurora asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. He hesitated, his gaze flickering away from hers. "I need your help," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. It was a surprising admission, a sign of vulnerability that she had rarely seen in him.
"How?"
she asked, her heart pounding in her chest. He explained his plan, a complex, dangerous scheme to infiltrate the Moretti family, to gather intelligence, to expose their weaknesses, to strike back. He wanted Aurora to use her social connections, her access to certain circles, to get close to the Morettas, to gather information. It was a risky proposition, a dangerous game, and she knew that she could be walking into a trap. But she also knew that she had no choice. She had to play along, to protect herself, to protect Lorenzo, to uncover the truth. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm. "But I need your assurance that Lorenzo will be safe." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You have my word, Dolcezza," he said, his voice a low, seductive whisper. "Lorenzo will be safe. As long as you cooperate." It was a conditional promise, a veiled threat, and she knew that she had to tread carefully. She was walking a tightrope, balancing her loyalty to Lorenzo with her dangerous alliance with Tommaso. She began her mission, attending social events, meeting with members of the Moretti family, gathering information, piecing together the fragments of their operation. She discovered that the Morettas were planning a major move, a bold attempt to seize control of the Dynasty family's most lucrative businesses. She also discovered something else, something that shocked her to her core. The Morettas had an informant, someone on the inside, someone who was feeding them information, someone who was betraying the Dynastys. The informant was close. Very close. She just had to discover who. The unseen threat was not just the Morettas, but the traitor within their own ranks. And Aurora knew that she had to unmask the informant before it was too late. The web was tightening, and she felt the pressure increasing from all sides. The Morettas, Tommaso, the informant, Lorenzo. Her world was a minefield, and one wrong step could be fatal. Chapter 10. Scars of Remembrance. The past, Aurora was learning, was not a separate entity, a distant shore to be viewed from afar. It was a living, breathing thing, intertwined with the present, shaping events, influencing relationships, and revealing hidden truths. And sometimes, the past held scars, deep wounds that refused to heal, memories that haunted and threatened to consume. One afternoon, while sorting through Giancarlo's belongings, Aurora discovered a hidden box, tucked away in a dusty corner of the attic. The box was old, made of intricately carved wood, and locked with a small, ornate key. She found the key, hidden in a secret compartment in Giancarlo's desk, the same place where she had found the incriminating letter. Her hands trembled as she opened the box, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside, she found a collection of old photographs, letters, and mementos, relics of a life she had never fully known. There were pictures of Giancarlo as a young man, handsome and carefree, before the weight of the famiglia had settled upon his shoulders. There were letters from his mother, filled with love and concern, a stark contrast to the cold, ruthless world he had inhabited. And then she found it, a photograph of Giancarlo with another woman. A woman Aurora had never seen before. The woman was beautiful, with long, dark hair and striking green eyes, the same color as Aurora's. She was smiling, her face radiant with happiness, her arm linked through Giancarlo's. Aurora felt a sharp pang of jealousy, a surprising surge of emotion for a man she had thought she knew, a man who was now gone. Who was this woman? And what had she meant to Giancarlo? She turned the photograph over. On the back, in Giancarlo's familiar handwriting, was a single name, Isabella. The name triggered a memory, a fleeting image from her childhood. A story her mother had told her, a whispered secret about a woman Giancarlo had loved, a woman who had been deemed unsuitable by the family, a woman who had disappeared. Isabella. She had been Giancarlo's first love, his true love, the woman he had wanted to marry before the family had intervened, before he had been forced to marry Aurora, to solidify the alliance between their families. Aurora felt a wave of sadness, of empathy for Giancarlo, for the life he had been denied, for the love he had lost. She realized that she had never truly known him, that she had only seen the surface, the carefully constructed facade he had presented to the world. She delved deeper into the box, searching for more clues, for more answers. She found a letter, written by Isabella to Giancarlo, a passionate, heartfelt plea for him to choose her, to defy his family, to follow his heart. The letter was heartbreaking, filled with a love that had been doomed from the start. Isabella had begged Giancarlo to run away with her, to start a new life, somewhere far from the darkness of the famiglia. But Giancarlo had refused. He had chosen duty, obligation over love. He had sacrificed his own happiness, and Isabella's, for the sake of the family. Aurora felt a profound sense of loss, of regret, not just for Giancarlo and Isabella, but for herself, for the life she had lived, for the choices she had made. She had also sacrificed her own happiness, her own dreams, for the sake of the family. She closed the box, her heart heavy with sorrow. The scars of remembrance were deep, painful, and she knew that they would never fully heal. The past had a way of resurfacing, of reminding her of the sacrifices she had made, of the life she could have had. She made a decision. She would find out what happened to Isabella. She owed Giancarlo that, at least. That evening, Tommaso found her in the garden, sitting on the same stone bench where they had often sat before. "You seem distant," he said, his voice a low murmur in the twilight. She turned to him, her eyes searching his. "I found something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something of Giancarlo's." She told him about the box, about the photograph, about Isabella. Tommaso listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she was finished, he simply nodded. "The past is a dangerous place, Aurora," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "It's best left buried." "But what happened to her?" Aurora asked, her voice pleading. "What happened to Isabella?" Tommaso hesitated, his gaze flickering away from hers. "She disappeared," he said. "No one knows what became of her." He was lying. She was sure of it. "I don't believe you," Aurora said. He didn't respond, staring at her with the intensity that always made her feel both exposed and strangely seen. The silence stretched, filled only with the chirping of crickets and the distant sounds of the city. Aurora knew that Tommaso held the key to Isabella's fate, that he knew more than he was letting on. The scars of the past were not just Giancarlo's. They were woven into the fabric of the family, into Tommaso's own history. And she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The weight of another's past now pressed upon her, adding another layer to the complex tapestry of secrets and lies. Chapter 11. Between Two Worlds. Aurora felt like a tightrope walker, balancing precariously between two worlds, the opulent, dangerous world of the famiglia and the simpler, more authentic world represented by Lorenzo and her rekindled past. The tension between these two worlds was pulling her apart, forcing her to make impossible choices, to navigate treacherous currents, to constantly weigh her loyalties and her desires. She continued her meetings with Lorenzo, their clandestine encounters becoming more frequent, more intense. They would meet in hidden corners of the city, stealing precious moments together, sharing whispered conversations, stolen kisses, a desperate attempt to recapture the love they had lost. "I can't keep doing this, Aurora," Lorenzo said during one of their meetings, his voice filled with frustration and despair. "This living in the shadows. It's tearing me apart." "I know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's tearing me apart, too. We could leave," he pleaded. "We could run away, start a new life, somewhere far from here. Somewhere where no one knows us, where we can be free. The temptation was almost overwhelming. To escape, to leave behind the darkness, the secrets, the constant fear. To be with Lorenzo, to live a simple, honest life, filled with art and love and peace. But she knew it was a fantasy, an impossible dream. She was too deeply entangled in the famiglia's web, too bound by duty, obligation, and the knowledge she possessed. "I can't," she said, her voice filled with regret. "Not yet. There are things I need to do. Questions I need to answer." "What questions are more important than our happiness?" he asked, his voice laced with bitterness. "The truth, Lorenzo," she said, her voice gaining strength. "The truth about Giancarlo's death. The truth about the famiglia. The truth about everything." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "You're obsessed, Aurora," he said. "Obsessed with this world, with this darkness. It's consuming you." "It's my world, too, Lorenzo," she said. "Whether I like it or not. And I have to find a way to make it right." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm afraid for you, Aurora," he said. "Afraid of what this will do to you. Afraid of what they will do to you." "I can handle it," she said, trying to sound confident, despite the tremor in her heart.
Can you?
He asked, his eyes searching hers.
Can you really?
She didn't answer.
She didn't know.
She was walking a tightrope, and she could feel herself slipping, losing her balance, about to fall. Meanwhile, her investigation into the Moretti family and the informant within the Dynasty ranks continued. She used her social connections, her access to certain circles, to gather information, to probe, to uncover the truth. She discovered that the informant was someone close to Tommaso, someone he trusted implicitly, someone who had access to his most sensitive information, someone who was betraying him and the entire family for their own personal gain. She narrowed down the suspects, focusing on 3 individuals: Alessandro, Giancarlo's ambitious younger brother Marco, Giancarlo's elderly uncle, a man with a long history of resentment and betrayal, and most shockingly, Sofia, the owner of the trattoria, the woman who had warned Aurora about the whispers, the woman who had seemed so kind, so sympathetic. The evidence pointed towards Sofia. She had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. She had been close to Giancarlo. She had access to the famiglia's inner circle, and she had a secret connection to the Morettis, a connection that stretched back years. Aurora was devastated. She had trusted Sofia, confided in her, and now she realized that she had been played, manipulated, used. She confronted Sofia, discreetly, cautiously, during a seemingly innocent visit to the trattoria. "Sofia," she said, her voice low and controlled, "I know." Sofia's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "Know what, Signora?" she asked, her voice feigning innocence. "I know about your connection to the Morettis," Aurora said. "I know you're the informant." Sofia's facade crumbled. Her face hardened, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and defiance. "You have no proof," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "I have enough," Aurora said. "And I will expose you. To Tommaso. To the famiglia." Sofia laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think Tommaso doesn't know?" she asked. "You think he's not involved?" The words hit Aurora like a physical blow. Tommaso? Involved with the Morettis? Involved in Giancarlo's death? It was unthinkable, impossible. And yet the tightrope snapped. Aurora felt herself falling, plunging into the darkness, the 2 worlds she had tried to balance collapsing around her. The betrayal was deeper, more profound than she had ever imagined. And she was caught in the middle, with no one to trust, nowhere to turn. Chapter 12. The Price of Loyalty. The revelation that Tommaso might be involved in Giancarlo's death and in league with the Morettis shattered Aurora's world. The man she had trusted, the man she had relied upon, the man she had felt something for, was potentially her enemy, her betrayer, her husband's murderer. She felt numb, disoriented, as if the ground beneath her feet had given way. She retreated to the villa, to the sanctuary of her late husband's study, the room where she had first discovered the truth, the room where it all began. She sat at Giancarlo's desk, her hands trembling as she reached for the hidden compartment, the place where she had found the letter, the proof of his murder. She needed to see it again, to re-examine it, to search for any clues she might have missed. She found the letter, its edges frayed, the ink faded, but the words still clear, still damning. The signature at the bottom, Tommaso's cousin, a known enforcer. But as she studied the letter more closely, she noticed something she had overlooked before. A small, almost imperceptible mark, a symbol, hidden beneath the signature. It was a tiny, stylized image of a serpent, coiled and ready to strike. The serpent. It was a familiar symbol, a recurring motif in the Dynasty family history. It represented cunning, deception, betrayal. But it was also associated with a specific branch of the family, a branch that had been ostracized, banished years ago. Tommaso's branch. Aurora's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of information, the clues, the whispers. Tommaso's father, the man he had killed, the man he had claimed was weak, had been involved with the Morettis. But what if it wasn't weakness? What if it was a deliberate alliance, a secret pact between two branches of the family, a plot to overthrow Giancarlo, to seize control of the famiglia? And what if Tommaso, despite his claims of loyalty, was following in his father's footsteps? What if he was the true mastermind behind Giancarlo's death, the driving force behind the Moretti threat, the ultimate betrayer? She needed proof, concrete evidence, something she could use to expose him, to bring him to justice. She knew she couldn't trust anyone within the famiglia, not anymore. She had to rely on herself, on her own cunning, her own instincts. She decided to confront Tommaso directly, to challenge him, to force him to reveal the truth. She knew it was a dangerous gamble, a potentially fatal move, but she had no choice. She found him in the drawing room, standing by the fireplace, his back to the room. He was holding a glass of brandy, swirling it slowly, seemingly lost in thought. But Aurora knew better. He was aware of her presence, of every rustle of her dress, every beat of her heart. "Tommaso," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "We need to talk." He turned, his eyes meeting hers across the room. The impact was like a physical blow. Those dark, intense eyes seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed facade, to the fear and uncertainty that lay beneath. "About what, Dulcezza?" he asked, his voice a low, resonant murmur. "About the letter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About Giancarlo's death. About the Morettis. About everything." He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've been busy," he said. "Investigating. Asking questions. Digging up the past." "I know the truth, Tommaso," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I know about your involvement. About your family's history. About the serpent." His smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold calculation. "You know nothing," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I know enough," Aurora countered. "Enough to expose you. Enough to destroy you." He took a step closer, his proximity almost overwhelming. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, the intensity of his gaze. "You are playing a dangerous game, Aurora," he said, his voice a low, husky murmur. "A game you cannot win." "I'm not afraid of you, Tommaso," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but her gaze unwavering. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You should be," he said. "You really should be." He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against her cheek. The touch, once a source of strange comfort, now felt like a threat, a violation. "I could have killed you, you know," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Many times. I could have silenced you, erased you, just like I erased Giancarlo." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth, of betrayal, of murder. He had admitted it. He had confessed.
"Why didn't you?"
Aurora asked, her voice barely a whisper. He hesitated, his gaze flickering away from hers. "Because," he began, his voice faltering. "Because I couldn't." He was protecting her.
"Despite everything. But why?"
The price of loyalty was steep, and Aurora had just learned that she had paid it unknowingly, to the wrong person. The man standing before her was a murderer, a traitor, a liar. And yet, a part of her still felt something for him. Something she couldn't explain, something she couldn't deny. The complexities of their relationship, the twisted bonds of the famiglia, had created a knot of emotions that she couldn't untangle. She was trapped, caught between her desire for justice, her longing for Lorenzo, and her feelings for Tommaso. The game had reached a critical point, and she knew that the next move could be her last. Chapter 13. A glimmer of hope. Despite the chilling confession, despite the overwhelming sense of betrayal, Aurora found a flicker of hope, a tiny spark of light in the encroaching darkness. Tommaso's hesitation, his admission that he couldn't kill her, revealed a vulnerability, a weakness, a conflict within him that she could exploit. She knew she had to tread carefully, that one wrong move could be fatal. But she also knew that she had to act, to find a way to expose him, to bring him to justice, to save herself and Lorenzo. She decided to use Tommaso's feelings for her, whatever they may be, to her advantage. She would play the role he expected, the grieving widow, the loyal member of the famiglia, while secretly gathering evidence, plotting his downfall, working to dismantle his carefully constructed web of lies. It was a dangerous game, a dance of deception on the edge of a knife, but she had no choice. She had to play the game, to win, to survive. She began to subtly manipulate Tommaso, using her words, her actions, her body language to influence him, to control him, to make him believe that she was still on his side, that she still trusted him. She would agree with him, support his decisions, offer him advice, all the while subtly planting seeds of doubt, of suspicion, in his mind. She would use her knowledge of his past, of his family's history, of his vulnerabilities, to undermine his confidence, to weaken his resolve. It was a slow, painstaking process, a delicate dance of manipulation and control. But she was patient, persistent, determined. She knew that she had to be careful, that one wrong step could expose her, could put her life, and Lorenzo's, in even greater danger. She also sought help from outside the famiglia, reaching out to a contact she had made years ago, a detective in the Florence police force, a man named Inspector Rossi, no relation, a man known for his integrity, his honesty, his unwavering commitment to justice. She met with Inspector Rossi discreetly, cautiously, in a hidden location, far from the prying eyes of the famiglia. She told him everything about Giancarlo's death, about Tommaso's involvement, about the Morettus, about the serpent, about her suspicions, her fears, her hopes. Inspector Rossi listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she was finished, he simply nodded. "This is a dangerous game you're playing, Signora de Rossi," he said, his voice grave. "The famiglia is powerful, ruthless. They will stop at nothing to protect their secrets." "I know," Aurora said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I have to do this. For Giancarlo. For myself. For justice." "I will help you," Inspector Rossi said, his voice firm. "But you have to be careful. Very careful. One wrong move, and it could be over." He agreed to investigate, discreetly, cautiously, gathering evidence, building a case against Tommaso and the Morettus. He warned her that it would take time, that it would be difficult, that it would be dangerous. But Aurora was not deterred. She had a glimmer of hope, a flicker of light in the darkness. She had an ally, a confidant, someone she could trust. She returned to the villa, to her dangerous dance with Tommaso, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew that the road ahead would be long, arduous, and fraught with peril. But she was ready. She was prepared to fight, to survive, to win. She found Tommaso waiting for her, his mood shifted, softer, almost remorseful. "Aurora," he said, his voice low and husky, I said things I shouldn't have said. I was angry, upset." She forced a smile, a facade of forgiveness, of understanding. "It's all right, Tommaso," she said, her voice gentle. "I understand. It's a difficult time. For all of us." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers closing around hers. The touch was warm, strong, and strangely comforting. I don't want to lose you, Aurora, he said, his eyes searching hers.
You mean too much to me.
She looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of deception, of manipulation. But she saw only sincerity, vulnerability, a genuine expression of something akin to love. Was it real? Or was it just another act, another layer of deception?
She didn't know.
But she knew that she had to use it, to exploit it to her advantage. She squeezed his hand and looked up at him. I am not going anywhere. The glimmer of hope was fragile, precarious, but it was there. And Aurora clung to it, fiercely, desperately, as she continued her dangerous dance, her fight for survival, her quest for justice. The game was far from over, but she had a chance, a fighting chance. And she was determined to take it. Chapter 14. The Gathering Storm. The storm clouds were gathering, both literally and figuratively. A heavy, oppressive atmosphere hung over Florence, the air thick with humidity, the sky a bruised, ominous purple. The city, usually vibrant and bustling, seemed to hold its breath, anticipating the inevitable downpour. And within the Dynasty family, the tension was palpable, a simmering undercurrent of fear and uncertainty. The Morettis were growing bolder, their attacks more frequent, more brazen. Tommaso was becoming increasingly paranoid, his control slipping, his grip on the Famiglia weakening. Aurora continued her dangerous dance, her double life, her manipulation of Tommaso, her secret alliance with Inspector Rossi. She was playing a high-stakes game, walking a tightrope between survival and destruction. She met with Inspector Rossi regularly, sharing information, exchanging updates, plotting their next move. The evidence against Tommaso was mounting, but it was still circumstantial, not enough to secure an arrest, to bring him to justice. We need something concrete, Signora de Rossi, Inspector Rossi said during one of their meetings. Something that directly links Tommaso to Giancarlo's murder. Something undeniable. I'm working on it, Aurora said, her voice determined. I'll find it. She knew that the key lay with Lorenzo. He had been Giancarlo's friend, his confidant. He might know something that could help her case. She arranged a meeting with Lorenzo, their first since her confrontation with Tommaso, since the revelation of his potential involvement in Giancarlo's death. They met in a small, secluded church, far from the prying eyes of the Famiglia. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken emotions, with fear, with longing, with regret. Lorenzo, she said, her voice trembling slightly, I need your help. He looked at her, his eyes filled with concern. What is it, Aurora? He asked. What's happened? She told him everything about her suspicions, about Tommaso's confession, about Inspector Rossi, about her desperate search for the truth. Lorenzo listened in silence, his expression growing increasingly grave. When she was finished, he simply nodded. I knew it, he said, his voice low and bitter. I knew Tommaso was involved. I didn't want to believe it. Do you know anything, Lorenzo? Aurora asked, her voice pleading. Anything that could help me? Anything that could link Tommaso to Giancarlo's death? He hesitated, his gaze flickering away from hers. There was something, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. Something Giancarlo told me. A secret. A confession. Aurora's heart skipped a beat. What secret? She asked, her voice barely audible. Giancarlo, he was planning to leave the Famiglia, Lorenzo said. He was tired of the violence, the corruption, the betrayal. He wanted out. He wanted a different life. And Tommaso knew? Aurora asked. Yes, Lorenzo said. Giancarlo told him. He confided in him. He trusted him. And Tommaso, he betrayed him, Aurora said, her voice filled with a mixture of anger and despair. Yes, Lorenzo said. He betrayed him. He killed him. To prevent him from leaving. To seize control of the Famiglia. Lorenzo told her that Giancarlo had given him something. A small, locked box. He had been instructed to give it to Aurora if anything were to ever happen to him. This was it. The concrete evidence she needed. The storm broke, finally, unleashing its fury upon the city. Rain lashed against the windows of the church. Thunder roared overhead. Lightning illuminated the stained glass windows, casting eerie, dancing shadows on the walls. It was a fitting backdrop for the unfolding drama, for the gathering storm within the Dynasty family, for the final confrontation that was about to take place. Aurora had the key, the missing piece of the puzzle, the proof she needed to expose Tommaso, to bring him to justice, to end his reign of terror. The storm raged, both outside and within, and Aurora knew that the time had come to face the tempest, to confront the darkness, to fight for her survival, for her freedom, for the truth. The elements mirrored her inner turmoil, a tumultuous blend of fear, determination, and a desperate hope for a brighter future. Chapter 15. Beneath the surface. Lorenzo retrieved the box from a hidden compartment behind a large, ornate crucifix in the church. It was small, made of dark, polished wood, and locked with a heavy brass padlock. The key, Lorenzo explained, was with Maria, the loyal housekeeper, the woman Aurora had entrusted with her secrets. Aurora felt a surge of hope, a flicker of light in the darkness. This was it, the concrete evidence she needed, the missing piece of the puzzle. She arranged a meeting with Maria, discreetly, cautiously, in the villa gardens, under the cover of the storm. The rain was still falling, a steady, relentless downpour, the wind whipping through the trees, creating a sense of urgency, of impending doom. "Maria," she said, her voice low and urgent, "I need your help. One last time." Maria looked at her, her eyes filled with concern. "Signora," she said, her voice hushed. "What is it?" Aurora explained about the box, about Lorenzo, about the key. Maria nodded, her expression grave. "I have it, Signora," she said. "I've kept it safe, just as Giancarlo instructed." She reached into her pocket and produced a small, ornate brass key. Aurora took it, her hands trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. "Thank you, Maria," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You are a true friend." "I am loyal to Giancarlo, Signora," Maria said. "And to you." "I will always be." Aurora returned to the villa, to her meeting with Lorenzo, the box clutched tightly in her hand. She found him waiting for her in the library, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "Do you have it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," she said, holding up the box. "I have it." They sat together at the large, oak table, the storm raging outside, the only illumination coming from a single lamp, casting long, dramatic shadows on the walls. Aurora inserted the key into the lock, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold it steady. The lock clicked open. She lifted the lid, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. Inside, she found a collection of documents, letters, photographs, and a small, leather-bound diary. The diary was Giancarlo's. They began to read, their eyes scanning the pages, their hearts sinking with each revelation. The diary revealed the full extent of Tommaso's treachery, his betrayal, his involvement in Giancarlo's death. It detailed his secret dealings with the Morettis, his plans to seize control of the Famiglia, his ruthless ambition, his cold, calculating cruelty. There were also letters, correspondence between Giancarlo and Isabella, Tommaso's aunt, the woman in the photograph. The letters confirmed Aurora's suspicions. Isabella had not disappeared. She had been murdered by Tommaso's father, with the knowledge and quiet approval of other family elders, to protect the family's honor. And there was a final entry, written just days before Giancarlo's death, expressing his fear, his suspicion that Tommaso was planning to betray him, to kill him. He wrote of his love for Aurora, his regret for the life they had lived, his hope that she would find happiness, that she would find the truth. Aurora closed the diary, her hands trembling, her eyes filled with tears. The truth was devastating, heartbreaking, but it was also liberating. She had the proof, the concrete evidence she needed to expose Tommaso, to bring him to justice. But as she looked up, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Tommaso was standing in the doorway, his face a mask of rage, his eyes blazing with fury. He had heard everything.
He knew everything.
"You treacherous bitch," he snarled, his voice low and menacing. "You were plotting against me. All along. He advanced towards them, his hand reaching inside his jacket, his movements swift and deadly. Aurora knew that this was it, the final confrontation, the moment of truth. The storm raged, both outside and within, and she prepared to face her fate, to fight for her survival, for her freedom, for the truth that lay beneath the surface of their carefully constructed world. The carefully built facade had crumbled, revealing the raw, brutal reality of their lives, and the final battle was about to begin. Chapter 16. Revelations in Moonlight. The air crackled with tension, thick with unspoken threats and the raw, primal fear of imminent violence. Tommaso's eyes, usually so controlled, so carefully masked, blazed with a fury that sent a shiver of terror down Aurora's spine. Lorenzo stood frozen, his face pale, his body rigid with fear. "You are going to betray me, Aurora," Tommaso said, his voice a low, menacing growl. "To hand me over to the authorities. To destroy everything I've built." "I was going to bring you to justice, Tommaso," Aurora corrected, her voice trembling slightly, but her gaze unwavering. "For Giancarlo's murder. For Isabella's murder. For all your crimes." He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the room. "Justice?"
He scoffed.
"There is no justice in our world, Aurora. Only power. Only survival." He pulled out a gun, a sleek, silver pistol, its barrel gleaming ominously in the dim light. Lorenzo gasped, taking a step back, his eyes wide with terror. "Tommaso, don't," Aurora pleaded, her voice desperate.
"It doesn't have to be this way."
"It does," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "It always does." He raised the gun, aiming it directly at Aurora. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable, for the searing pain, for the darkness that awaited. But the shot never came. Instead, there was a sudden commotion, a flurry of movement, a shout, and then silence. Aurora opened her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. Tommaso was standing there, his gun still raised, but his eyes were no longer focused on her. He was looking past her, towards the doorway, his face a mask of shock, of disbelief, of fear. Aurora turned, following his gaze. Standing in the doorway was Inspector Rossi, his gun drawn, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and something else. Something that looked like sadness. Behind him were several police officers, their weapons also drawn, their faces tense, their bodies poised for action. "It's over, Tommaso," Inspector Rossi said, his voice calm but firm. "Drop the gun." Tommaso hesitated, his grip tightening on the pistol, his eyes darting between Aurora and Inspector Rossi. He was trapped, cornered, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. "You set me up," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and accusation, directing it at Aurora. "I did what I had to do, Tommaso," Aurora said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her heart. "For justice. For the truth." "There is no truth," Tommaso spat, his voice filled with bitterness. "Only lies. Only betrayal." He lowered the gun, slowly, reluctantly, his eyes filled with a mixture of defeat and despair. The police officers moved forward, disarming him, handcuffing him, taking him into custody. As they led him away, Tommaso looked back at Aurora, his eyes locking with hers. There was no anger now, no hatred, only a profound sadness, a deep, aching regret. "I loved you, Aurora," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I truly did." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of unspoken emotions, of lost opportunities, of a love that had been twisted, corrupted, destroyed by the darkness of their world. Aurora watched him go, her heart aching with a mixture of grief, of relief, of something akin to pity. She had exposed him, betrayed him, brought him to justice. But she had also lost him. The storm had passed, leaving behind a trail of destruction, of broken lives, of shattered dreams. But the moon had emerged from behind the clouds, casting a soft, silvery glow upon the scene, illuminating the truth, revealing the secrets that had been hidden for so long. Inspector Rossi approached Aurora, his face etched with concern. "Are you all right, Signora de Rossi?" he asked, his voice gentle. I think so," Aurora said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's over," he said. "You're safe now." "But at what cost?" Aurora asked, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. He knew. They both knew. The cost had been high. Very high. Lorenzo came to her side, taking her hand, his touch warm and comforting. "It's over, Aurora," he said, his voice filled with relief. "You did it. You saved us." She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I saved anyone, Lorenzo," she said. I did what I had to do." The moonlight bathed them in its gentle glow, a silent witness to the revelations, the betrayals, the sacrifices that had taken place. The night was quiet. Finally, the storm replaced by a fragile peace, a tentative hope for a future free from the darkness that had consumed them for so long. Aurora had found the truth, but she had also learned that the truth, like the moonlight, could be both beautiful and cold, illuminating and unforgiving. Chapter 17. The Serpent's Kiss. The aftermath of Tommaso's arrest was a whirlwind of activity, a chaotic mix of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and internal power struggles within the de Rossi family. Aurora found herself at the center of it all, a reluctant heroine, a symbol of resistance against the darkness that had plagued their world for so long. She cooperated fully with the authorities, providing them with the evidence she had gathered, testifying against Tommaso and the Morettis, helping to dismantle their criminal empire. The trials were long, arduous, and emotionally draining, forcing her to relive the trauma, to confront the betrayals, to face the consequences of her actions. But she persevered, driven by a fierce determination to see justice served, to honor Giancarlo's memory, to create a better future for herself and for those who had been caught in the crossfire of the Famiglia's endless conflicts. The Morettis were brought down, their leaders arrested, their businesses seized, their power broken. The de Rossi family was shaken to its core, its reputation tarnished, its future uncertain. Alessandro, Giancarlo's younger brother, attempted to seize control, to fill the void left by Tommaso's arrest. But he lacked the strength, the cunning, the ruthlessness of his predecessors. He was quickly outmaneuvered, sidelined by the other members of the Famiglia, his ambitions thwarted. The family elders, the old guard, the men who had controlled the de Rossi empire for decades, were forced to confront their own complicity, their own role in the violence, the corruption, the betrayals that had plagued their world. They turned to Aurora. They offered her a position of power, a leadership role within the Famiglia. They recognized her strength, her intelligence, her resilience. They saw her as the only one who could restore the family's reputation, rebuild its power, guide it into a new era. It was a tempting offer, a chance to reshape the Famiglia, to cleanse it of its darkness, to create a different kind of legacy. But it was also a dangerous proposition, a potential trap, a return to the world she had fought so hard to escape. She hesitated, torn between her desire for justice, her longing for a peaceful life, and her sense of responsibility to the family, to the people who depended on her. She sought advice from Lorenzo, from Maria, from Inspector Rossi. They all offered different perspectives, different counsel, but ultimately, the decision was hers. Lorenzo urged her to leave, to walk away from the Famiglia, to start a new life with him, far from the darkness, the secrets, the constant threat of violence. Maria encouraged her to stay, to accept the offer, to use her power for good, to reform the family from within, to create a legacy of peace and justice. Inspector Rossi cautioned her, reminding her of the dangers, the risks, the potential for corruption, for betrayal. He urged her to be careful, to be vigilant, to protect herself. Aurora listened to them all, weighing their words, considering their perspectives, but ultimately, she made her own decision. She rejected the offer. She refused to become the new capo, the new leader of the de Rossi family. She chose to walk away, to leave behind the darkness, the secrets, the violence, to forge her own path, to create her own destiny. But before she left, she made one final move, one last act of defiance, of justice, of revenge. She revealed the truth about Isabella, Tommaso's aunt, Giancarlo's first love, the woman who had been murdered by Tommaso's father. She exposed the family secret, their shame, their complicity in her death. She used the serpent symbol, the mark that had been found on the letter, the symbol of Tommaso's branch of the family, to expose their treachery, their betrayal, their crimes. It was a symbolic act, a serpent's kiss, a final, deadly blow to the old guard, to the men who had controlled the family for so long, the men who had sacrificed Isabella for the sake of their own power, their own ambition. The revelation caused a scandal, a rift within the family, a final, devastating blow to their reputation, their power. The old guard was overthrown, their authority shattered, their legacy tarnished. Aurora had brought down the serpent, had exposed its venom, had cleansed the family, not by embracing its darkness, but by rejecting it, by walking away. She had chosen truth over power, justice over loyalty, freedom over obligation. She had broken the cycle of violence, of betrayal, of revenge that had plagued the de Rossi family for generations. She left Florence, with Lorenzo, hand in hand, ready to start a new life, a life free from the shadows, the secrets, the constant threat of the famiglia. She had paid the price of loyalty, and she had learned that true loyalty was not to a family or a code, but to oneself, to one's own conscience, to one's own sense of justice. The serpent's kiss had been delivered, and Aurora had finally found peace, not in power, but in freedom. Chapter 18. Crossroads of Fate. Leaving Florence was like shedding a skin, a heavy, suffocating layer of darkness and deceit. Aurora felt a lightness, a sense of liberation she hadn't experienced in decades. The city, with its beauty and its secrets, its art and its violence, receded into the distance, becoming a memory, a chapter closed in the book of her life. She and Lorenzo settled in a small, picturesque village on the Tuscan coast, a place far removed from the opulent villas and treacherous alleys of Florence. They found a modest house, overlooking the sea, surrounded by olive groves and vineyards, a place where they could breathe freely, where they could heal, where they could finally be themselves. Lorenzo returned to his art, his passion rekindled, his creativity flowing freely, inspired by the beauty of the landscape, by the peace of their new life, by the love they shared. He painted vibrant canvases filled with light and color, a stark contrast to the dark, somber tones of his earlier work. Aurora found solace in the simplicity of their new existence. She tended to the garden, growing herbs and vegetables, nurturing life, finding peace in the connection with the earth. She read, she walked along the beach, she watched the sunsets, she savored the quiet moments, the simple pleasures that had been denied to her for so long. They built a new life together, a life based on trust, on honesty, on love. They healed each other's wounds, comforted each other's fears, supported each other's dreams. They found a happiness, a contentment, that they had never thought possible. But the past, like a persistent shadow, lingered. Aurora still carried the scars of her experiences, the memories of the betrayals, the losses, the violence she had witnessed and participated in. She would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, her body drenched in sweat, haunted by nightmares of Tommaso, of Giancarlo, of the famiglia, of the darkness she had escaped. Lorenzo would hold her, comfort her, reminding her that she was safe, that she was free, that the past was behind them. And slowly, gradually, the nightmares faded, the scars began to heal, the memories lost their power to wound. One day, a letter arrived. It was from Inspector Rossi. Aurora opened it with trembling hands, her heart filled with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. The letter informed her that Tommaso had been sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. He had refused to cooperate with the authorities, to implicate anyone else, to reveal any further secrets of the famiglia. He had remained silent, defiant, loyal to the code, to the end. The letter also contained a surprising revelation. Tommaso had requested to see Aurora. He wanted to speak to her one last time. Aurora was shocked, confused, torn. She had no desire to see him, to face him, to relive the trauma, to reopen the wounds. But she also felt a strange compulsion, a need to understand, to hear his final words, to find some kind of closure. She discussed it with Lorenzo. He was understandably reluctant, worried about the impact it would have on her, on their new life. "You don't have to do this, Aurora," he said. "You owe him nothing." "I know," she said, "but I think I need to. For myself. To understand. To find peace." He looked at her, his eyes filled with love and concern.
"Then I'll go with you," he said.
"I won't let you face him alone." They traveled back to Florence, together, hand in hand, ready to face the past one last time. They met with Tommaso in the visiting room of the prison, a sterile, impersonal space, filled with the muffled sounds of conversations, of tears, of regret. Tommaso looked different. He was thinner, paler, his eyes devoid of their usual intensity, their fire. He was dressed in a prison uniform, stripped of his power, his status, his identity. But there was also something else, something new. A softness, a vulnerability, a hint of remorse. They sat across from each other, separated by a thick glass partition, their voices transmitted through a small, metal speaker. "Aurora," he said, his voice low and husky, "thank you for coming." "Why did you want to see me, Tommaso?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her heart. He hesitated, his gaze flickering away from hers. I wanted to apologize," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "Apologize?" Aurora repeated, her voice filled with disbelief. "For what? For murdering Giancarlo? For betraying me? For ruining my life?"
"For all of it," he said.
"For everything. I was wrong. I was blinded by ambition, by power, by the code. I lost myself. I lost you." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, aching sadness. "I loved you, Aurora," he said. "I truly did. I still do." The words, spoken in that sterile, impersonal space, hung in the air, heavy with the weight of unspoken emotions, of lost opportunities, of a love that had been twisted, corrupted, destroyed by the darkness of their world. Aurora felt a pang of sympathy, of pity for him, for the man he had been, for the man he could have been. But she also felt a sense of closure, of release. "I know, Tommaso," she said, her voice gentle. "And I believe you. But it's too late. It's over." He nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "I know," he said. I needed you to know. I needed to say it." They talked for a while longer, about the past, about the present, about the future. He asked about Lorenzo, about their new life. He expressed a genuine happiness for them, a sincere wish for their well-being. As the time drew to a close, Tommaso looked at Aurora, his eyes filled with a final plea. "Will you forgive me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Aurora hesitated, her mind racing, her heart torn. Could she forgive him? Could she forgive all the pain, the suffering, the betrayal? She looked at him, at the broken, defeated man before her, and she realized that she could. She had to. For herself. For her own peace. "Yes, Tommaso," she said, her voice firm. "I forgive you." A single tear rolled down his cheek. He smiled, a weak, fragile smile, but a genuine smile nonetheless. "Thank you, Aurora," he said. "Thank you." They said goodbye, a final farewell, a closure to a chapter of their lives that had been filled with darkness, with secrets, with violence. Aurora and Lorenzo left the prison, hand in hand, walking out into the bright sunshine, leaving behind the shadows, the bars, the regrets. They had reached a crossroads of fate, and they had chosen the path of forgiveness, of healing, of love. The past was behind them, finally, and the future, though uncertain, was filled with hope, with possibility, with the promise of a new beginning. They had faced the darkness, and they had emerged, stronger, wiser, and free. Chapter 19. The Reckoning. The reckoning came not in a blaze of gunfire, nor in a courtroom drama, but in the quiet unraveling of a life, in the slow, inexorable consequences of choices made, of sins committed. Tommaso's imprisonment had left a void, a vacuum of power within the Dynasty family, and the vultures, as always, were circling. Alessandro, despite his earlier failures, made another attempt to seize control, to claim the mantle of capo. But he was weak, ineffective, a pale imitation of his brother, of Giancarlo. He lacked the ruthlessness, the cunning, the charisma to hold the family together. The other factions, sensing weakness, began to move against him, challenging his authority, undermining his decisions, plotting his downfall. The family, once a cohesive, powerful force, was fragmenting, splintering into warring factions, each vying for control, each driven by greed, by ambition, by revenge. The Morettas, though weakened by their earlier defeat, saw an opportunity to strike back, to reclaim their lost territory, to settle old scores. They began to encroach on Dynasty businesses, to intimidate their associates, to sow chaos and discord within their ranks. The Dynasty family, once feared and respected, was becoming a laughingstock, a target, a victim of its own internal conflicts, of its own past sins. The elders, the old guard, the men who had once held absolute power, were now powerless, irrelevant, their authority eroded, their influence diminished. They watched helplessly as the empire they had built, the legacy they had created, crumbled around them. The reckoning had come, not from outside, but from within. The seeds of destruction had been sown long ago, in the betrayals, the violence, the corruption that had permeated the family for generations. And now, the harvest was being reaped. Aurora, living her quiet, peaceful life with Lorenzo on the Tuscan coast, received occasional updates from Inspector Rossi, from Maria, about the unfolding chaos within the Dynasty family. She felt a mixture of emotions, sadness, regret, a sense of detachment, and a quiet satisfaction that justice, in its own way, was being served. She had escaped the darkness, but the darkness continued to consume those who remained trapped within its grasp. One day, a package arrived. It was addressed to Aurora, and it bore no return address. She opened it with trembling hands, her heart filled with apprehension. Inside, she found a single object, a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was the same box she and Lorenzo had found in the church that had contained the evidence that had brought about the end. The same box, but now empty, all those important papers removed. Attached to the box was a note, a single, handwritten sentence: "The serpent always returns to its nest." Aurora felt a chill run down her spine. The serpent, Tommaso's symbol. The symbol of his branch of the family. The symbol of betrayal, of cunning, of revenge. Who had sent the box? And what did it mean? Was it a threat? A warning? A reminder of the past? Or something else entirely? She showed the note to Lorenzo. He was troubled, concerned, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and anger. "It's Tommaso," he said. "He's still pulling the strings, even from prison."
"But how?"
Aurora asked. "He's locked away. He has no contact with the outside world." "He has ways," Lorenzo said. "He always did. He's a master manipulator, a puppeteer. He's playing a game, even now." Aurora felt a renewed sense of unease, a creeping fear that the past was not truly behind them, that the darkness was still lurking, waiting to strike. She contacted Inspector Rossi, informing him of the package, of the note, of her concerns. He promised to investigate, to look into it, but he also cautioned her, reminding her that Tommaso was a dangerous man, even behind bars. "Be careful, Signor Dynasty," he said. "Be very careful. He may be down, but he's not out. He still has power. He still has influence." Aurora and Lorenzo decided to leave their coastal village, to move to a more secure location, to disappear, to protect themselves from the potential threat. They sold their house, packed their belongings, and vanished, leaving no trace, no forwarding address, no clue to their whereabouts. They became ghosts, shadows, living on the fringes, always looking over their shoulders, always fearing the serpent's return. The reckoning had come, not just for the Dynasty family, but for Aurora as well. She had escaped the darkness, but the darkness had not forgotten her. The serpent's kiss had left a lasting mark, a constant reminder of the past, of the price of loyalty, of the enduring power of betrayal. The game, it seemed, was not over. It had simply entered a new, more dangerous phase. And Aurora, once again, found herself caught in its coils, fighting for her survival, for her freedom, for her peace. Chapter 20. A Legacy Forged in Fire. Years passed. Aurora and Lorenzo lived a nomadic life, moving from place to place, always watchful, always cautious, never staying in one location for too long. They adopted new identities, new names, blending into the background, living simple, unassuming lives, far from the opulent villas and treacherous alleys of their past. They found solace in each other's company, in their shared love, in their mutual desire for peace, for normalcy, for a life free from fear. They created a small, intimate world, a sanctuary from the darkness that continued to haunt them. But the past, like a persistent shadow, lingered. The memory of Tommaso, of the famiglia, of the betrayals, the violence, the constant threat, remained a part of their lives, a constant reminder of the world they had escaped. They followed the news, discreetly, cautiously, keeping track of the events unfolding in Florence, in Italy, in the world. They learned that the Dynasty family had continued to decline, its power waning, its influence diminishing, its reputation shattered. Alessandro had been killed, murdered in a power struggle, a victim of his own ambition, of his own weakness. The other factions had fought amongst themselves, tearing each other apart, until there was nothing left but ruins, remnants of a once great empire. The Morettas had also fallen, their leaders imprisoned, their businesses seized, their power broken. The cycle of violence, of revenge, had consumed them all, leaving behind a trail of destruction, of broken lives, of shattered dreams. Tommaso, they learned, was still in prison serving his life sentence. He remained silent, defiant, unrepentant, a prisoner of his own past, of his own choices. One day, a letter arrived. It was from Maria, the loyal housekeeper, the woman who had been Aurora's confidant, her ally, her friend. The letter was brief, but its contents were shocking. Maria was dying. She was living in a small, remote village in the mountains, far from Florence, far from the famiglia, far from the darkness. She had one final request. She wanted to see Aurora one last time. Aurora was torn. She had no desire to return to Italy, to revisit the past, to expose herself to potential danger. But she also felt a sense of obligation, of loyalty to Maria, the woman who had risked her life to help her, the woman who had remained true to Giancarlo, to her, to the end. She discussed it with Lorenzo. He was understandably reluctant, worried about her safety, about their new life, about the risks involved.
"You don't have to do this, Aurora," he said.
"You owe her nothing."
"I know," she said.
"But I think I need to. For her. For myself."
"To say goodbye."
He looked at her, his eyes filled with love and concern. "Then I'll go with you," he said. "I won't let you face this alone." They traveled back to Italy, discreetly, cautiously, using their assumed names, avoiding any contact with their former lives, with the remnants of the famiglia. They found Maria in a small, humble cottage, surrounded by the rugged beauty of the mountains, the air crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the polluted atmosphere of their past. Maria was frail, weak, her body ravaged by illness, but her eyes still held the same spark of intelligence, of loyalty, of kindness that Aurora remembered so well. They sat together, by her bedside, holding hands, talking, reminiscing, sharing memories, saying goodbye. Maria told Aurora that she had no regrets, that she had lived a good life, that she had remained true to her principles, to her conscience. She also revealed a final secret, a secret she had kept hidden for years, a secret that shed new light on the past, on the events that had shaped their lives. She told Aurora that Tommaso had a A son he had fathered before his imprisonment, a son he had never known, a son who had been raised in secret, far from the famiglia, far from the darkness. The son was now a young man, living a simple, honest life, unaware of his true heritage, of his father's identity, of the legacy he carried within him. Maria had been watching over him, protecting him, ensuring his safety, his anonymity. She asked Aurora to continue her work, to protect the son, to ensure that he never became entangled in the famiglia's web, to allow him to live a life free from the violence, the betrayal, the constant threat that had plagued their own lives. It was a final request, a final act of loyalty, a final attempt to break the cycle of darkness, to create a better future. Aurora was stunned, overwhelmed by the revelation. She had never imagined that Tommaso had a son, an heir, a potential successor to the Dynasty legacy. But she also felt a sense of responsibility, of obligation to protect this innocent young man, to prevent him from falling victim to the same fate that had befallen his father, his family. She promised Maria that she would do everything in her power to protect him, to ensure his safety, his happiness, his freedom. Maria smiled, a weak, fragile smile, but a genuine smile nonetheless. "Thank you, Aurora," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." She closed her eyes, peacefully, and passed away, her final breath a sigh of relief, of contentment, of peace. Aurora and Lorenzo buried Maria in the small village cemetery, overlooking the mountains, a fitting resting place for a woman who had lived a life of quiet courage, of unwavering loyalty, of unwavering kindness. They left Italy, once again, returning to their nomadic existence, their lives forever changed by Maria's final revelation, by her final request. They knew that they could never truly escape the past, that the shadow of the famiglia, of Tommaso, would always linger. But they also knew that they had a new purpose, a new mission, a new legacy to forge. They would protect Tommaso's son, this innocent young man, this symbol of hope, this potential for a different future. They would ensure that he never became entangled in the darkness, that he never experienced the violence, the betrayal, the constant threat that had defined their own lives. They would create a legacy of their own, a legacy not of power, or wealth, or fear, but of love, of kindness, of protection, of peace. A legacy forged in fire, tempered by loss, and guided by hope. A legacy that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to their resilience, their courage, their unwavering commitment to a better future. The serpent had been defeated, but its shadow remained, and Aurora and Lorenzo were determined to ensure that its venom would never poison another generation. Epilogue. The Tuscan sun, a familiar warmth on her skin, felt different now. It wasn't the oppressive heat of Florence, heavy with secrets and unspoken threats, but a gentle embrace, a promise of peace. Aurora sat on the terrace of a small, unassuming cafe in a village that didn't appear on any map, sipping her espresso, watching the world go by. Lorenzo, his silver hair catching the light, sketched in a worn leather-bound book, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hand moving with the practiced ease of a lifetime dedicated to his art. They had lived like this for years, nomads in their own country, always moving, always watchful, but always together. The fear had faded, replaced by a quiet vigilance, a habit born of necessity. They were ghosts, living on the fringes, their past a carefully guarded secret, their future an unwritten page. But today, the air felt different. Today, a chapter was closing and another was beginning. A young man approached their table, hesitantly, his eyes filled with a mixture of nervousness and determination. He was tall, with dark hair and striking green eyes, the same color as Aurora's, the same color as Tommaso's. This was Marco, Tommaso's son, the boy Maria had entrusted to their care, the young man they had watched over from afar, protecting him, guiding him, ensuring that he never became entangled in the darkness of his father's legacy. They had never revealed their identities to him, never told him the truth about his past, about his family, about the world they had escaped. They had simply been their anonymous benefactors, silent guardians, offering him opportunities, guiding his path, ensuring that he had the chance to live a normal, honest, peaceful life. He had grown into a fine young man, intelligent, compassionate, kind, a testament to Maria's unwavering devotion to their own quiet efforts. He was studying to be a doctor, dedicating his life to healing, to helping others, a stark contrast to the violence and destruction that had defined his father's world. Signora, signore, he said, his voice respectful, his Italian tinged with a slight accent they couldn't quite place. I received your message. Aurora smiled, a warm, genuine smile, a smile that reached her eyes, a smile that held no secrets, no shadows, no regrets. Marco, she said, her voice gentle.
Please sit down.
He sat, his eyes searching theirs, his curiosity palpable. He knew they were more than they seemed, that they held a key to his past, to his identity, to the questions that had haunted him for years. They had decided to tell him the truth. Not all of it, not the gruesome details, not the violence, the betrayals, the darkness, but enough. Enough for him to understand, to make his own choices, to forge his own path, to create his own legacy. They told him about his father, about his family, about their history, about the world they had escaped. They told him about Maria, about her unwavering loyalty, about her final request. They told him about their own role, about their efforts to protect him, to guide him, to ensure that he had the chance to live a different life. He listened in silence, his expression shifting from shock to disbelief, to sadness to understanding. The weight of his heritage, of his family's legacy, settled upon him, a heavy burden, but also a challenge, an opportunity. When they were finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, processing the information, absorbing the truth, confronting the reality of his past. Thank you, he said finally, his voice filled with emotion. For telling me, for protecting me, for everything. He looked at them, his eyes filled with a newfound understanding, a respect, a gratitude that transcended words. I don't know what to say, he said. It's a lot to take in. You don't have to say anything, Marco, Aurora said. Just live your life. Be happy. Be good. Be true to yourself. He nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. I will, he said. I promise. He stood up, ready to leave, ready to face his future, armed with the truth, with the knowledge of his past, with the freedom to choose his own path. Will I see you again? He asked hesitantly. Aurora and Lorenzo exchanged a look, a silent communication, a shared understanding. Perhaps, Aurora said, smiling. Perhaps. He smiled back, a genuine smile, a smile that held no shadows, no secrets, no regrets.
Goodbye, he said.
And thank you. Again. Goodbye, Marco, Aurora said. And good luck. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, blending into the anonymity of the village, a young man with a bright future, a future free from the darkness of his past. Aurora and Lorenzo watched him go, their hearts filled with a mixture of pride, of relief, of hope. They had fulfilled their promise. They had honored Maria's final request. They had broken the cycle of violence, of betrayal, of revenge. They had created a legacy of their own, a legacy of protection, of kindness, of love. A legacy that would endure, long after they were gone, a testament to their resilience, their courage, their unwavering commitment to a better future. Lorenzo took Aurora's hand, his touch warm and comforting, a silent reassurance, a promise of continued love, of continued companionship, of continued peace. The Tuscan sun, setting in a blaze of glory, cast a golden glow upon the scene, illuminating their faces, their silver hair, their smiles. They had faced the darkness, and they had emerged, scarred but not broken, defeated but not destroyed, transformed by their experiences, strengthened by their love. They had found their peace, not in power or wealth or revenge, but in each other, in their shared journey, in their quiet acts of kindness, in their unwavering commitment to a better world. The serpent was gone, its venom neutralized, its legacy erased. And in its place, a new legacy had been forged, a legacy of hope, of healing, of love. A legacy that would endure, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, to the transformative power of forgiveness, to the enduring promise of a brighter future. The echoes of the past remained, but they no longer dictated the present, nor the future. They were free, truly free. The end.